You're telling me the entire grid is failing on Christmas Eve? The tower's power grid began to fail on Christmas Eve. Executives panicked as alarms echoed through empty halls, and the billionaire CEO realized money couldn't stop a total system collapse. Then the night security supervisor stepped forward. Calm, precise, unshaken. Within minutes, the man they overlooked took control of everything, because this wasn't just about wealth. It was about worth. Before I show you the exact moment when the security guard overrode a billion-dollar meltdown in a locked sublevel corridor, by the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. Beneath the glass walls and polished floors, something far more fragile than power was about to be exposed. The alarm hadn't started yet. That sharp question cut through the executive floor as snow pressed against the towering windows of Vane Global. The CEO stood at the head of the conference table, jaw tight, tablet glowing in her hand as reports flickered red. Outside, the city shimmered under storm warnings. Inside, silence hung thick as frost. Down below, in the wide marble lobby meant for investors and dignitaries, Elias Mercer adjusted the collar of his security jacket and studied the monitors. He noticed things most people didn't. Slight voltage inconsistencies, a flicker in the sublevel feed, a half-second lag in the elevator response. He didn't look worried. He looked prepared. 2 sets of small footprints tracked melted snow across the lobby tiles. A woman stood near the entrance, her coat too thin for the storm, her twin daughters clutching either side of her arms. "Our car just died," she said quietly to the front desk. "We just need a few minutes, until the tow truck comes." The marble reflected the chandelier light onto their faces. The girls stared at the towering Christmas tree in the atrium like it was something sacred. Upstairs, heels clicked sharply toward the elevator. Moments later, the CEO emerged onto the mezzanine balcony overlooking the lobby. Her coat was tailored. Midnight, black. Diamonds caught the light in her ears. "This building isn't a shelter," she said coldly. "Have security escort them out." Elias felt the words more than he heard them. He stepped forward. "Ma'am, the storm's getting worse. 2 services are delayed. Just the lobby." I gave an instruction. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The twins looked up at him. One of them offered a small, hopeful smile. The other shivered. He gave the slightest nod to the receptionist and keyed something discreetly into his handheld device. The lobby heaters adjusted upward 2 degrees. Cameras pivoted subtly, buying time without breaking protocol. "I'll handle it," he said evenly. Snow battered the revolving doors harder. Then the lights flickered. It was almost imperceptible. Almost. Upstairs, monitors began flashing warnings. A low mechanical hum shifted in pitch beneath the building, a deep vibration only someone attuned to systems would catch. Elias's eyes narrowed. That wasn't the weather. That was a load imbalance. His radio crackled with static. In the executive wing, voices rose sharply. "What's happening? Backup generators aren't syncing. Call infrastructure. Now." He exhaled slowly. His fingers moved across the control panel at the security desk, pulling up thermal maps of the sublevels. A red bloom spread near the primary server core. Overheating. Deferred maintenance logs scrolled across the screen. He'd flagged them months ago. Budget delays. Executive approval pending. Up above, the CEO's confident posture faltered as a senior tech officer whispered urgently into her ear. Her gaze shifted toward the lobby, toward the man at the security desk. The building trembled again, not violently, just enough. In the lobby, one of the twins tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, is this part of the storm?" "It's just thunder, sweetheart," Marisol whispered, though she wasn't sure. Elias straightened. "Ma'am," he said into his radio, voice steady, "you've got a cascading failure in the thermal containment loop. If the core breaches 40% over threshold, you'll lose the east wing servers." A pause. Then, sharp disbelief. "How would you know that?" He didn't answer that. Instead, he looked at the security feed of the sublevel corridor, narrow, industrial, nothing like the polished floors above. That was where power truly lived, not in glass offices, in steel conduits and heat and risk. Another tremor rippled upward. This time, everyone felt it. The CEO's voice cut through the building-wide intercom. "All remaining staff, stay where you are. We're assessing the situation." Assessing. Elias checked the rising thermal graph again. They didn't have time to assess. He stepped away from the desk. The twins watched him as if sensing something shifting. "Sir?" Marisol asked softly. He gave her a reassuring nod. "You're safer in here than out there right now." Upstairs, the elevator doors opened sharply. The CEO descended, heels echoing across marble. She stopped 10 feet from him. "Explain," she demanded. He met her eyes without defiance, without submission. "You can't fix this from the boardroom," he said quietly. "You need someone in the sublevel manually rerouting the load before the generators desync completely. And you think that someone is you?" The building lights flickered again, longer this time. Somewhere deep below, metal groaned. He didn't raise his voice. "Yes, ma'am." Silence stretched between executive authority and worn boots. Snow hammered against the glass as alarms finally began to wail. And the lobby, meant for investors, not crises, became the front line. The alarms didn't stop. They layered over each other, high, shrill warnings from the server floor, lower mechanical groans from somewhere beneath the marble. The CEO stood rigid in the center of her own lobby, the sound swallowing the authority she had carried down the elevator moments earlier. "Engineering is 10 minutes out," one executive said breathlessly. "They're trying to remote in. They won't make it," Elias replied. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The certainty in it cut through everything. Her eyes sharpened. "You're a security supervisor." "Yes, ma'am. And you're telling me my infrastructure team can't handle my own building?" He held her gaze. "They can't handle it from a screen." Another tremor rolled through the floor, stronger now. The Christmas tree lights flickered violently before stabilizing. One of the twins gasped and clutched her sister's hand. Up on the mezzanine, 2 board members whispered urgently, glancing between the CEO and the man in the security jacket, as if recalculating something they hadn't expected to question tonight. He stepped toward the main console embedded into the wall behind the reception desk. "Your east generator's compensating too aggressively. It's about to overcorrect. When it does, you'll spike heat in the containment chamber. You're guessing." "No," he said evenly. "I'm not." For a fraction of a second, doubt flickered across her face. Then pride returned. "Why would I trust you?" Because he'd lived inside systems like this. Because he'd smelled metal burn in places where failure meant more than stock prices. Because he recognized the rhythm of collapse before others heard it. But he didn't say any of that. Instead, he tapped the thermal display. The red bloom spread wider. 42%, he murmured. "Your past safe margin." The receptionist stepped back from the desk, as sparks flickered briefly from a recessed lighting panel overhead. Staff members who'd stayed late began drifting into the lobby, phones raised, fear replacing professionalism. Marisol tightened her grip on her daughters. Is it going to explode?" "No," he said, firm and calm. "Not if we move." The CEO noticed the steadiness in his tone, the way the twin stopped trembling when he spoke. That unsettled her more than the alarms. Another executive rushed forward. "Ma'am, legal says if the data center fails, we could lose encrypted archives. We're talking billions." Billions. The word hung heavy. He looked at her, not with challenge but with clarity. "This isn't about money right now. It's about containment." She inhaled sharply. For the first time, the building wasn't responding to her commands. It was responding to physics. "And what exactly are you proposing?" she asked. "I need access to sublevel 3. Manual override. That corridor is restricted to senior engineers. Then promote me for the next 20 minutes. A few startled breaths broke from the gathered employees. The audacity of it. Or maybe the courage. The east wing lights flickered again, longer this time. Somewhere deep below, something clanged violently. 45%, he said quietly. Her jaw tightened. She turned toward the executives behind her. None of them stepped forward with certainty. None of them offered a better solution. The silence betrayed them. He could feel it. The shift. Not in authority yet, but in perception. He glanced toward the twins again. They were watching him like he was already doing something heroic. He wasn't. He was calculating risk. "Ma'am," he said one last time, steady as stone, "you can keep debating credentials. Or you can let me stop this." The building hummed louder. She looked at the marble floors, the towering glass walls, the carefully curated art pieces meant to symbolize dominance and innovation, all of it fragile under heat and pressure. Then she looked at him. "You get one chance," she said. "If you make this worse, I won't." She hesitated only a second more before nodding toward the biometric console. "Grant temporary clearance." Gasps rippled quietly through the lobby. He stepped forward as the scanner blinked to life. If you've ever seen someone underestimated in a room full of power, you already know what's happening here. And if stories about dignity rising under pressure matter to you, subscribe with the bell on. Because moments like this don't happen where titles shine. They happen where character does. The biometric lock flashed green. Access granted. The elevator doors to the service corridor slid open with a metallic sigh. Cold industrial air spilled into the polished lobby, carrying the faint scent of oil and overheated wiring. He turned back once, briefly. "Keep everyone here," he told the CEO. "If the pressure equalizes too fast, you'll feel a jolt. Don't panic." "You're giving me instructions?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." He stepped into the service elevator. The doors closed, and for the first time that night, every executive in the building was watching the security supervisor descend into the place where power never looked. The service elevator shuddered as it descended, metal cables straining above him while the alarms continued their relentless chorus. The polished marble and chandelier glow disappeared behind steel walls scratched from years of freight use. Down here, power wasn't decorative. It was raw. Elias stood alone in the humming box, eyes fixed on the small thermal reader in his hand. 48%. Too fast. The elevator jolted before settling again. He braced instinctively, boots steady against the vibration. Heat was building below, and heat never negotiated. When the doors slid open onto sublevel 3, a wave of dense, metallic air struck him. The corridor stretched ahead, narrow, industrial, lined with conduit pipes and emergency lighting that flickered erratically. This was the building's spine. The part executives never saw in investor tours. Above him, in the lobby, silence had replaced argument. The CEO stood near the biometric console, staring at the security feed projected onto a large screen. Employees clustered behind her, watching the grainy footage of a man in a dark jacket moving with unhurried precision through a space that looked nothing like the world they were used to. "Is he even certified for this?" A board member muttered. She didn't answer. On the screen, he reached the main thermal containment panel. Steam hissed softly from a seam in the wall. He crouched, gloved hands moving over bolts and gauges with familiarity that didn't belong to guesswork. 50%, the receptionist whispered as numbers climbed on the overhead display. The twins clung to their mother, eyes wide at the footage. Down below, Elias unscrewed the outer casing of the manual override box. The metal was hot beneath his fingers. He didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned closer, listening. Every system had a rhythm. Pumps pulsed, coolant cycled. Generators roared in layered patterns. When something was wrong, the rhythm fractured. He heard it now. The east generator was compensating beyond tolerance, forcing excess heat back into the containment loop. Remote engineers wouldn't see that nuance from temperature charts alone. He pressed his radio. "Ma'am, I need you to reduce east wing load by 15% immediately." Static crackled. The CEO hesitated before responding. "We have encrypted contracts running through those servers. If you don't cut it," he said calmly, "you won't have servers." Another violent tremor shook the corridor, and dust fell from an overhead beam. The lights dimmed sharply before returning in weak pulses. Upstairs, several employees gasped. "Do it," she ordered finally. "Reduce east wing load." Screens in the lobby flickered as sections of the building went dark. Decorative lighting died first, then half the executive floor. The Christmas tree dimmed, leaving only the faint glow of emergency bulbs. In the sublevel, the pitch of the generator shifted slightly. He exhaled. "Good," he murmured. "Hold it there." He reached into the panel and pulled the manual bypass lever halfway. It resisted, heat radiating through the steel handle. For a split second, memory overlaid reality. Sand, smoke, shouting, a power grid on the verge of catastrophic failure miles from home. Different country. Same stakes. He pushed harder. The lever snapped into place. Above, the main screen spiked wildly before leveling by a fraction. 47%, someone called out. A drop. Small, but real. The CEO stepped closer to the screen, eyes narrowing. This wasn't luck. The numbers were responding directly to his actions. "Who is he?" one executive whispered. She didn't know. Down below, he adjusted a secondary valve. Movements economical. Practiced. Sweat beaded along his temple, though the air was freezing beyond the heat of the machinery. "Ma'am," he said into the radio, voice steady despite the chaos around him, "your backup coolant cycle was never fully synchronized after last quarter's update." There was silence on the other end. "That's not possible," a tech officer snapped in the background. "It is," he replied evenly, "and it's about to overload the west loop." As if on cue, a new alarm pierced the corridor. Above, the screen flashed amber. West loop climbing, the receptionist confirmed. The CEO's throat tightened. Her executive team, armed with degrees and consultants, stood frozen while a man they'd ordered to escort a family into a snowstorm was orchestrating the survival of their empire from underground. She stepped closer to the microphone. "What do you need?" she asked. It was the first time her voice held something other than command. "I need full override clearance on coolant sequencing," he said without hesitation. "And I need you to trust that I know what I'm doing." The word trust lingered. Employees exchanged glances. Another tremor rippled through the building, but this time the vibration felt different, less violent, more controlled. 45%, someone announced. The twins stared at the screen in awe. One of them whispered, "He's fixing it." Marisol swallowed hard. Down in the corridor, Elias tightened the final adjustment on the manual valve. The roaring hum softened, shifting toward balance. Not stable yet. but no longer spiraling. He wiped his hands against his jacket and looked at the final control lever ahead of him, the one that would determine whether the system fully stabilized or plunged into irreversible failure. Above, the CEO leaned forward, watching every movement. And for the first time that night, power was no longer standing at the head of a boardroom. It was standing in a steel corridor waiting for a security supervisor to pull the final lever. The final lever stood shoulder high, painted a dull emergency red, its base wrapped in warning labels most executives had never read. Elias stepped closer. The corridor vibrated beneath his boots, not violently now, but insistently. Heat shimmered faintly along the containment pipes. The system wasn't collapsing anymore, it was hovering. "Current load?" he asked into the radio. 44%, the receptionist answered, her voice steadier than before. Holding. Holding wasn't safe. Holding was temporary mercy. Above him, in the marble lobby, the CEO stood rigid beneath dim emergency lights. Half her building remained dark. The executive floor, once glowing with prestige, sat in shadow. Around her, employees watched the live feed in absolute silence. She had built her reputation on certainty, on decisive control. Now she was waiting on a man in a service corridor. "Why isn't it stabilizing?" a board member demanded. She didn't look away from the screen. "Because it's not fully corrected yet." Down below, Elias crouched beside the coolant manifold and pressed his palm against the pipe. Too hot. The secondary loop hadn't synced properly when the east wing load was cut. He traced the vibration through the metal with his fingertips, eyes closing briefly, not in panic, but in concentration. Memory surfaced again. Field manuals, emergency simulations. The smell of burnt insulation in a remote operations base when a grid went unstable. Back then, hesitation cost lives. Now, hesitation cost everything she'd built. He opened his eyes and stood. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "your sequencing algorithm is compensating too slowly. It's waiting for digital confirmation before adjusting the west loop." "That's standard protocol," one of her tech officers snapped through the open channel. "Standard protocol is going to fry your servers." A brief, dangerous pause filled the air. Above, she clenched her jaw. "What are you suggesting?" "I bypassed the algorithm. You can't just override proprietary system coding. I can manually sync the loop." Silence again. Employees shifted uneasily. The twins watched the screen like it was a movie they didn't fully understand, but somehow felt was important. "What happens if you're wrong?" she asked, her voice lower now. He didn't sugarcoat it. "You lose the core. And with it, contracts, credibility, dominance, her empire." Another tremor pulsed through the building. The Christmas tree lights blinked out entirely, plunging the lobby into the muted glow of emergency strips along the floor. 46%, someone whispered. The numbers were climbing again. Her heart thudded harder than she would ever admit aloud. For the first time since founding this company, she felt something she had carefully engineered out of her leadership style. Uncertainty. Down below, Elias reached for the emergency bypass hatch. The metal handle radiated heat. He wrapped his jacket sleeve around his hand and pulled. The hatch opened with a sharp metallic groan. Steam burst outward, fogging the camera lens for a moment. Above, several employees gasped. When the image cleared, he was already inside the access chamber. Tight space, exposed wiring, valves humming under pressure. "This is insane," a board member muttered. "No," she said quietly, surprising even herself. "It's necessary." Inside the chamber, he braced his shoulder against the panel and began turning the manual sync wheel. It resisted at first, stiff from years of disuse. Executives rarely approved budgets for maintenance that didn't show on investor slides. He pushed harder. The wheel creaked, then shifted. The generator's pitch changed. Above, the thermal graph wavered violently. 49, the receptionist started. Then stopped. The red bloom froze. Numbers flickered. 43, she corrected, voice breaking slightly. Dropping. A collective exhale swept through the lobby. The CEO's hand gripped the edge of the console. On the screen, the man in the maintenance chamber moved with deliberate efficiency, sweat-cutting lines through the dust on his forehead. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't panicking. He was leading. "Who trained him?" one executive whispered. She didn't answer. But something inside her shifted. This wasn't improvisation. This was expertise. Below, Elias tightened the final bolt securing the manual sync and stepped back as the system recalibrated around him. The violent hum softened into a steady mechanical rhythm. "Load stabilizing across both loops," he reported calmly. "Give it 60 seconds. Upstairs, the screen's red faded slowly to orange, then yellow. 40% came the update. Applause tried to break out, nervous, uncertain, but died quickly as everyone waited to see if it would hold. The twins squeezed each other's hands. Marisol closed her eyes briefly in relief. The CEO stared at the monitor, unable to look away. The numbers continued downward. 38. 36. The tremors ceased entirely. In the sublevel corridor, he stepped out of the chamber and removed his gloves, rolling his shoulders as if finishing a routine task. "System stabilized," he said. Silence filled the building. Not alarm silence, reverent silence. Above, lights flickered back to life section by section. The chandelier brightened. The Christmas tree shimmered again. Her empire was standing, because a security supervisor had crawled into its hidden spine and corrected what pride and budget cuts had ignored. The elevator doors at sublevel 3 slid open again with a metallic sigh. He stepped inside. As the lift began its ascent, every executive in the lobby stood waiting. And this time, no one was looking down at him. The service elevator rose slowly, cables humming in a steadier rhythm than before. Above, the lobby lights returned in stages. First, the emergency strips faded. Then the chandeliers flared back to life, scattering reflections across polished marble. The doors opened. He stepped out into silence. No alarms, no tremors, just dozens of eyes fixed on him. For a moment, no one moved. The CEO stood 10 feet away, posture composed but different now, less rigid, more aware. Around her, executives shifted awkwardly, unsure whether to clap or question. "Status?" she asked. "Contained," he replied evenly. "You'll need a full systems audit in the morning. There's still residual heat in the west loop, but it's stable." Murmurs rippled through the room. The board members glanced at one another, recalculating their assumptions. One of the tech officers stepped forward, defensive edge still clinging to his voice. "You bypassed our algorithm?" "Yes. That system was designed by a global consulting firm. It wasn't built for this failure pattern." The room fell quiet again. The twins stared at him like he'd just returned from somewhere mythical. One of them whispered, "You fixed it." He gave her a small nod. But the thermal monitor behind the reception desk flickered again, briefly. A faint spike trembled across the graph. He saw it immediately. The others didn't. "Ma'am," he said, turning back toward the CEO, "we're not done." Her brows knit. "Explain." The manual sync stabilized the generators, but the primary coolant reservoir is still compensating unevenly. If it rebounds too quickly, you'll get a pressure surge. A board member frowned. "You just said it was stable." "It is," he said calmly. temporarily. A soft metallic knock echoed faintly through the floor beneath them, subtle but distinct. He looked toward the ceiling as if reading the building itself. The CEO followed his gaze. "What do you need now?" she asked. He didn't hesitate. Full access to the control hub, not just sublevel 3, the central sequencing core. That's restricted to executive clearance. Then walk with me. The audacity of it hung in the air again, but it didn't sound reckless this time. It sounded necessary. She studied him carefully. The security jacket, the oil smudge on his sleeve, the steady breathing of someone who had faced worse than flickering lights. And then she did something no one in that lobby expected. She stepped forward. "Open the control hub," she ordered. Gasps surfaced again, quieter this time, but heavier. If you've ever watched Power Shift in real time, you know it doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with silence and choice. And if stories about dignity rising under pressure resonate with you, subscribe with the bell on. Because what's happening here isn't just about a building. It's about who we trust when everything's on the line. The biometric doors at the far end of the lobby slid open, revealing a corridor most employees had never seen. He didn't stride ahead arrogantly. He walked beside her. Equal pace. The corridor narrowed as they moved deeper into the building's secured core. The air changed, cooler, tinged with ozone and faint mechanical heat. Glass walls revealed rows of humming servers bathed in sterile blue light. Inside the control hub, screens displayed complex sequencing data scrolling in real time. "Residual pressure spike predicted in 3 minutes," he said quietly, eyes scanning the panels. The tech officer hovered near the doorway. "We already recalibrated." "No," he interrupted gently. "You recalibrated digitally. The manual override altered flow velocity. The system hasn't accounted for the friction shift yet." He stepped to the primary console. The CEO watched his hands move across the interface, not hesitantly, but with familiarity that unsettled her assumptions all over again. "You've done this before," she said, not as accusation, but realization. He didn't look at her. Something like it. The graph spiked slightly. "There," he murmured. He adjusted the coolant sequencing delay by a fractional margin, barely noticeable on the display. The spike flattened instantly. The hum of the server banks steadied into a uniform tone. Silence. Not fragile silence. Solid silence. The tech officer stared at the screen. Speechless, the board members behind the glass walls exchanged looks that said more than words could, and for the first time that night she understood something uncomfortable. Control wasn't about position. It was about competence. He stepped back from the console. "You're clear," he said simply. The building stood calm around them. No alarms, no tremors. Just the quiet power of systems working the way they were meant to, and the undeniable reality that the man they had almost sent back into the storm had just saved everything they owned. Outside the control hub, the twins waited in the lobby, still watching the corridor. When he emerged beside the CEO, the entire room shifted, not with applause this time, but with respect. Something had changed. Not in the building, in them. And the CEO felt it most of all. Respect settled over the lobby like a new kind of silence. Not the brittle quiet of fear. Not the forced calm of corporate composure. Something heavier. Earned. He stepped out of the control corridor beside her, wiping the last trace of grease from his fingers with a folded cloth he'd pulled from his pocket. The chandeliers glowed warmly overhead now, reflecting off polished marble as if nothing had ever gone wrong. But everyone in the room knew better. "Systems are fully synchronized," the tech officer announced after double-checking the monitors. His voice no longer carried skepticism, only reluctant admiration. A ripple of subdued applause broke from the employees near the reception desk. It wasn't thunderous. It wasn't dramatic. It was honest. The twins clapped the loudest. He glanced at them briefly, offering the faintest smile before returning his attention to the CEO. "You'll need to keep the East Wing at reduced load until morning," he said calmly, "and schedule a full mechanical inspection before you ramp back to full capacity." She nodded slowly. There was no trace of dismissal in her expression now. "Walk with me," she said. They moved away from the center of the lobby toward the towering glass windows that framed the snow-covered city. Outside, the storm still raged, flakes whipping sideways against the glass. Inside, warmth and light had returned. "You bypassed proprietary sequencing," she said quietly, keeping her voice low enough that only he could hear. "Yes. And you corrected an imbalance my senior engineers didn't detect." "Yes, ma'am." She studied him carefully, this time not as an employee but as a question. "Where did you learn to do that?" He didn't answer immediately. His gaze drifted briefly toward the reflections in the glass, her tailored silhouette beside his worn jacket. "A long time ago," he said evenly. "That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters right now." Her jaw tightened slightly. Not from irritation, but from realization that control had slipped beyond her reach in more ways than one tonight. Behind them, employees were already murmuring. Words like military and engineer floated quietly through the room. The tech officer approached cautiously. "Ma'am," he said, "we ran a quick background check through internal files. His credentials don't list advanced engineering." Of course they didn't. Security supervisors didn't require combat infrastructure specialization. She looked back at him. "Is there something in your history we should know about?" she asked, more curious than confrontational now. He considered the question. Not because he feared exposure, but because he measured necessity. "The building's stable," he said instead. "That's what you need to know." The twins suddenly broke free from their mother's grip and hurried across the marble floor toward him. "Thank you," one of them said, breathlessly. "You were so brave," the other added. Marisol followed quickly, apologetic. "I'm so sorry, they just—" "It's all right," he said gently, crouching slightly so he was eye level with the girls. "You're safe. That's what matters." The CEO watched that interaction carefully. He wasn't performing. He wasn't claiming recognition. He was grounding fear. The board members approached hesitantly. "That was impressive," one of them admitted, adjusting his tie awkwardly. "You may have prevented a catastrophic loss." He straightened slowly. "Maintenance logs were flagged months ago," he said calmly. "Deferred funding made the system vulnerable." The words weren't accusatory. They were factual. And they landed. She felt it. A subtle sting of accountability she hadn't allowed herself to consider when budgets were being optimized for investor optics. "You're implying this was preventable," she said. "I'm stating it was." Silence thickened again, but differently this time. Not tense. Reflective. Snow continued to batter the windows as if reminding them how close disaster had hovered. One of the board members cleared his throat. "We'll convene a review in the morning." She didn't look at him. Her attention remained on the man who had stepped into steel and heat without hesitation. "Tomorrow is Christmas," she said quietly. He nodded once. "Yes, ma'am. And yet you stayed." "I was scheduled. That's not what I meant." He held her gaze, steady and unguarded. "For some of us," he said softly, "staying is the job." The weight of that statement settled deeper than any alarm had earlier. Behind them, the twins tugged at their mother's coat again. "Mom, look, the lights are so pretty now." Marisol's eyes shimmered faintly. "Yes, they are." The CEO glanced around the lobby, at the employees who had witnessed everything, at the executives who had doubted him, at the security desk where he had first warned her. Public exposure wasn't loud tonight. It was undeniable. "You'll submit a full report first thing in the morning," she said finally. "Yes, ma'am. And you'll attend the executive review." A flicker of surprise passed across the tech officer's face. He didn't react outwardly. If that's what's required. It is. For the first time since descending from the boardroom, she extended her hand. Not ceremonially, not theatrically, simply. "Thank you," she said. He shook it once, firm, brief. Respect meeting respect. Around them, something subtle shifted in the way employees stood, in the way eyes followed him, not as background staff, but as someone whose presence now carried weight. The storm outside raged on. But inside the tower, the hierarchy had been quietly rewritten. Her hand fell back to her side, but the shift it signaled lingered in the air. The lobby no longer felt like a stage for authority. It felt like a crossroads. Employees were still gathered in small clusters, whispering, glancing at him in ways they hadn't before. Not curiosity. Recognition. The CEO turned toward the executives. Clear the remaining staff except essential personnel, and inform the infrastructure we're running on reduced capacity until further notice. There was no argument this time. Orders moved swiftly. As people began dispersing, she remained where she stood, watching him return to the security desk as if nothing extraordinary had happened. He checked the monitors, adjusted a camera angle, logged a timestamp into the system. Routine. Deliberate. Unshaken. She approached slowly. "You flagged those maintenance vulnerabilities months ago, yes. And they were denied at budget review, yes, ma'am. Why didn't you escalate?" He glanced up briefly. "I did." Her jaw tightened. "To whom?" "Operations management." Twice, a faint crease appeared between her brows. She knew what that meant. Layers of hierarchy. Decisions diluted before reaching her desk. The twins were seated now on one of the leather lobby benches, sipping warm cups of cocoa the receptionist had quietly prepared. Marisol watched the exchange carefully. "You're telling me this failure was predictable," she said. "I'm telling you it was avoidable." He didn't speak with bitterness. He spoke with precision. Behind them, one of the board members lingered, clearly unsettled. "We can't assign fault tonight," he interjected. "No one's assigning fault," he replied calmly. "I'm explaining cause." Silence again. Outside, snow hammered against the glass with renewed intensity. The storm wasn't done. It reminded them that the world didn't care about titles. A faint vibration pulsed beneath the floor, smaller than before but present. He noticed instantly. The CEO saw his expression shift. "What is it?" "Pressure equalizing through the secondary vents," he answered. "It's normal after a manual sync." "Normal?" she pressed. "Yes, but we should monitor for 2 hours minimum." "You're staying," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am." The board member exhaled sharply. Surely infrastructure can handle observation remotely now. He shook his head slightly. Remote feeds don't catch mechanical resonance. You need someone listening. Listening. The word felt foreign in a tower built for projection. She studied him again, reassessing not just skill, but instinct. "Then we monitor together," she said. That drew a few startled glances from the remaining executives. She ignored them. They moved toward the central console, standing side by side before the thermal display. The numbers remained stable, glowing in calm yellow tones. 34%, the receptionist updated quietly. Steady. The twins giggled softly at something on a phone screen. The sound felt almost sacred in the aftermath of chaos. "You were ready to send them back into the storm," he said quietly, not accusatory. Just factual. Her shoulders stiffened slightly. "This is a corporate headquarters. It's also a building with heat," she inhaled slowly. "I don't make decisions emotionally, no," he said gently. "You make them efficiently." The difference lingered between them. Marisol approached cautiously, holding the twins' hands. "Ma'am, I just want to say thank you for letting us stay." The CEO looked at her for a long moment. This time she truly saw her, not as disruption, but as mother. "You shouldn't have had to ask," she said quietly. The admission surprised even her. Marisol nodded once, grateful. As they stepped back, the CEO lowered her voice again. "You implied earlier that you've handled situations like this before." He kept his eyes on the screen. "Yes. Infrastructure consulting? No. Private sector?" A faint pause. "Government." The word landed carefully. Her gaze sharpened. "What kind of government work equips someone to bypass containment algorithms under pressure?" He didn't elaborate. "It was a long time ago," he said. "Why leave it?" He hesitated, not because he didn't have an answer, but because it wasn't one she expected. "My son was 6, he said quietly. "He needed me home more than grids did." The honesty caught her off guard. In the glass reflection before them, she saw it clearly now. Worn boots, steady hands, and something she had rarely prioritized in her own ascent. Presence. A soft chime interrupted the moment. The thermal display shifted again, slightly upward. 36%, the receptionist announced. He leaned closer to the console, listening, not just watching. The faint vibration beneath the floor steadied again. "It's fine," he said. Residual pressure dissipating. She exhaled, unaware she'd been holding her breath. "You could have stayed in whatever government role that was," she said quietly. "Yes. Higher pay. Yes. More prestige." He gave a small nod. "And instead you're here." "Yes, ma'am." There was no resentment in his tone. No regret. Just choice. The board members had fully retreated now, leaving only essential staff in the lobby. The building hummed in quiet equilibrium. "Tomorrow," she said slowly, "we'll review infrastructure budgets personally." He didn't react outwardly. That would be wise. She glanced sideways at him. "Is that advice?" "Yes." A faint, unexpected curve touched the corner of her mouth. Snow continued to rage beyond the glass walls. Inside, something else had shifted, less visible than thermal graphs but more consequential. Authority had been exposed, and dignity had stood its ground. The thermal display held steady at 33%. The building's hum had softened into something almost peaceful, as if the tower itself had exhaled. He remained beside the console, eyes attentive, posture relaxed but ready. Across the marble lobby, the twins had fallen half asleep against their mother's shoulders, exhaustion finally winning over adrenaline. The CEO watched him in the reflection of the glass wall. "You said the government," she began quietly. "That's broad." "Yes." She turned fully toward him now. "I don't make decisions on partial information. And I don't volunteer history that isn't relevant," he replied calmly. A faint edge returned to her expression, not arrogance, but habit. She was used to knowing everything about the people inside her empire. "You bypassed proprietary sequencing faster than my senior engineers could diagnose the issue," she said. "That's relevant." He met her gaze steadily. "I specialized in critical infrastructure stabilization," he said after a moment. "Combat environments, field grids, emergency containment." The words didn't rise above conversational tone, but they carried weight. The tech officer, still lingering near the console, froze. "Combat?" he repeated. "Yes." "Military?" "Yes." Silence rippled outward again. She studied him with new calculation, not suspicion this time, but comprehension. "What rank?" she asked. He hesitated. "Captain," he answered. The title hung in the air like something misplaced in a security uniform. "You led teams?" she pressed. "Yes." "How many?" Enough, the understatement said more than numbers ever could. Behind them, Two employees who had remained near the reception desk exchanged stunned looks. The whispers began again, quieter but sharper. The twins stirred at the sound of murmuring. One of them blinked sleepily at him. "You were a soldier?" He offered a gentle nod. "A long time ago." Her eyes widened in quiet awe. The CEO folded her arms slowly. "And you left that to work security here?" "I left to raise my son." She exhaled softly. For someone who built her legacy on ambition, the simplicity of that answer unsettled her more than any technical revelation had tonight. The tech officer stepped forward hesitantly. "Ma'am, if that's accurate, his clearance history would." She raised a hand. "That won't be necessary." Her gaze never left him. "You flagged vulnerabilities months ago," she said. "You understood structural weaknesses my department overlooked." "Yes, and you stayed silent when denied funding." "I documented the risk, but you didn't fight." He considered that. "I did," he said quietly. "Within the chain I was given." The words struck harder than accusation would have. She had built layers of hierarchy to streamline efficiency. Tonight, those layers had nearly cost her everything. A faint vibration pulsed through the floor again, lighter now, but present. He glanced toward the thermal graph. 31%, the receptionist reported. Stable. The storm outside continued raging, snow swirling like static against the towering glass. Inside, warmth held firm. The CEO stepped closer to him, close enough that her voice didn't carry beyond them. "You realize what this means?" she said. He didn't answer. "It means I've had someone with your expertise guarding my lobby instead of guiding my infrastructure." He remained still. "You saved this company tonight," she continued. "I stabilized a failure." She studied his face carefully. No pride. No demand. Just fact. If you've ever watched someone underestimated reveal who they truly are, you know it doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with clarity. And if stories like this remind you that real strength often hides in plain sight, subscribe with the bell on. Because sometimes the quietest person in the room carries the heaviest history. The tech officer cleared his throat again, more respectfully this time. "Captain, sir, if you don't mind me asking, why security?" He didn't look at him. "Predictable hours," he said simply. "Close to home." The twins were fully asleep now, their mother gently brushing hair from their faces. The CEO followed his gaze. "You chose presence over prestige," she said. "Yes, ma'am." A long pause followed. Outside, wind battered the building in violent bursts. But inside, systems held. "Effective immediately," she said finally, voice steady and clear enough for the remaining staff to hear. "We will be conducting a full structural review of infrastructure oversight. Personally." The employees straightened slightly. "And," she continued, eyes still on him, "our security supervisor will sit in that review." Shock rippled again, but this time it wasn't disbelief. It was acknowledgement. He didn't react outwardly. "If that's what you require." "It is," she said. The thermal display ticked down another fraction, 30%. The building stood calm, and in the center of the marble lobby, beneath restored lights and falling snow beyond the glass, hierarchy had quietly reversed itself, without shouting, without spectacle. Just truth, revealed under pressure. The thermal display glowed steady at 30%. The numbers no longer climbing, no longer threatening. The storm outside still lashed the glass, but inside the tower the air felt different, clearer, as if something heavy had been stripped away. Most employees had gone home now, escorted carefully through the loading dock where snowplows had carved narrow paths through the drifts. Only essential personnel remained in the lobby, along with the board member who had chosen to stay and observe the aftermath. He returned to the security desk, logging the final manual adjustments into the system. His movements were precise, economical, not celebratory. Routine. Across the lobby, the CEO stood near the towering Christmas tree, watching him. 30 minutes without fluctuation, the receptionist reported quietly. Pressure fully normalized. Good, he replied without looking up. We'll hold monitoring for another 90. The board member stepped forward, clearing his throat. Captain. He didn't correct him. That containment maneuver, was it standard protocol? It was necessary protocol, he said calmly. That's not what I meant. He finished logging the entry before turning slightly. Standard procedures assume standard failures. This wasn't one. The CEO approached again, heels muted now against the marble. Walk me through what happens next. He gestured toward the control hub corridor. We'll gradually restore east wing load in increments. 5% every 20 minutes. If the thermal variance holds steady, we resume full capacity by morning. And if it doesn't, we isolate and cool manually again. There was no fear in his tone, just readiness. She studied the console for a moment, then looked back at him. You'll oversee the ramp-up. Yes, ma'am, that's not a request. He gave a small nod. The twins stirred softly on the leather bench. Marisol adjusted their coats, eyes heavy with exhaustion. The storm hadn't eased, and tow trucks were still delayed across the city. The CEO noticed. Has anyone contacted roadside services? She asked. Yes, ma'am, the receptionist answered. Severe delays. He glanced toward the family briefly. They shouldn't be driving tonight anyway, he said. The board member frowned slightly. We can't house civilians overnight in corporate property. The words hung cold in the warm lobby. Before he could respond, the CEO spoke. They're not civilians, she said evenly. They're guests. The board member hesitated. We have liability. We have humanity, she interrupted quietly. Silence followed. The storm howled against the glass, punctuating her decision. Marisol looked up, startled. Ma'am, we don't want to cause trouble. You're not, she replied. You'll stay until the roads are safe. The twins, half awake, smiled faintly. He returned his attention to the thermal display as the East Wing restoration began. Increment 1, he said. 5% load returned. The numbers trembled slightly, then steadied. Stable, he confirmed. The CEO remained beside him, watching the graph as though learning a new language. You read systems the way others read balance sheets, she said quietly. Systems tell the truth, he replied. If you listen. She absorbed that. Another 20 minutes passed in careful monitoring. Conversation softened into low murmurs. The storm outside began to lose its violent edge, though snow still fell thick and steady. Increment 2, he said. Another 5% restored. A minor spike flickered, 32%, then settled back to 31%. With intolerance, he murmured. The board member shook his head slightly in reluctant admiration. You handled that with remarkable composure. He didn't respond. Praise wasn't fuel. Responsibility was. The CEO folded her arms loosely. Tomorrow's review won't be symbolic, she said. Infrastructure oversight will change. He glanced at her briefly. It should. You're direct. I prefer efficient. A faint smile touched her expression again. Across the lobby, one of the twins shuffled sleepily toward him, blanket dragging behind her. Mister? She asked softly. He crouched instinctively. Yeah? Are you going to make sure it doesn't break again? Her question carried no technical understanding, just trust. Yes, he said gently. I will. She nodded once, satisfied, and returned to her mother. The CEO watched that exchange carefully. You command trust easily, she observed. He straightened slowly. Trust isn't commanded. Another increment restored. 40% east wing load. Stable. The building's hum grew slightly stronger but controlled. The board member checked his watch. It's nearly midnight, Christmas Eve. The lobby clock ticked toward 12. Snow drifted softly now instead of slamming. The CEO looked around her towering headquarters. The marble floors, the glass walls, the tree glowing brighter than before. Then she looked at him. "You've spent your Christmas Eve in a service corridor," she said quietly. "I was scheduled." "That's still not what I mean." He didn't answer. Because some sacrifices didn't need narration. The thermal display held steady at 30% core pressure despite restored load. He exhaled slowly. "We're clear," he said. And this time, when the silence settled, it wasn't heavy. It was earned. Midnight struck softly through the lobby speakers, a gentle chime layered over the steady hum of restored systems. Outside, the storm had weakened to a quiet snowfall, flakes drifting instead of striking. Inside the tower, warmth held firm, full capacity restored, the receptionist confirmed, watching the final increment settle into place. No variance. He studied the thermal graph for several seconds longer than necessary. Not out of doubt, out of discipline. Numbers didn't deserve trust without observation. "Lock sequencing," he said calmly. "Maintain manual oversight until morning." The tech officer nodded quickly, already inputting commands with new attentiveness. Around the lobby, a subtle release moved through the remaining staff. Shoulders lowered. Breath returned. Phones came out, not to record panic this time, but to send messages home. "We're okay." The CEO stepped forward into the center of the marble floor, beneath the towering Christmas tree that shimmered brighter than it had all night. "Everyone," she said. Her voice carried differently now. Not sharper. Steadier. The remaining employees gathered loosely, forming a quiet semicircle. The twins stood beside their mother, wrapped in blankets the receptionist had found in a storage closet. "Tonight," she continued, "this building faced a failure none of our projections anticipated." She paused, glancing briefly toward him. "We were not saved by protocols or projections." Her gaze settled fully on him now. "We were saved by expertise and courage." The word courage lingered. A few employees began clapping, tentative at first, then stronger. The sound filled the lobby, echoing against glass and marble. He shifted slightly, uncomfortable with spectacle. She extended her hand toward him again, but this time not privately. "Step forward," she said. He did. The applause grew louder, not because she commanded it, but because they had witnessed the truth themselves. The board member who had resisted earlier nodded slowly, conceding what was undeniable. "You prevented catastrophic loss," she said clearly. "And you did it without seeking recognition." He met her eyes evenly. "I did my job. You did far more than that." She turned slightly, addressing everyone. "Effective immediately, we are establishing a new infrastructure oversight division. It will report directly to me." A ripple of surprise moved through the room. "And it will be led by the man who stabilized this company tonight." The words settled heavily. The tech officer's eyes widened. The board member inhaled sharply. He remained still. "Ma'am," he began carefully, "I was hired as security." "You were underutilized," she replied. A faint smile flickered at the corner of his mouth despite himself. "I have responsibilities," he said quietly. "Outside this building." "I'm aware," she answered. "The position will reflect that." The subtext was clear. Hours, flexibility, consideration. The twins clapped again, though they didn't fully understand what was being announced. Marisol stepped forward hesitantly. "Ma'am, you don't have to do this because of tonight." She turned toward her gently. "I'm not." The board member finally spoke. "We'll need formal review. You'll have it," she said calmly. In the morning. No one argued. He looked around the lobby, the faces that had once glanced past him without seeing. The security desk. the corridor he had descended into when everything hung in balance. Public exposure didn't need headlines. It needed witnesses. "I'll submit a written assessment before sunrise," he said. She nodded. "I expect it." The applause faded gradually into respectful quiet. Across the glass walls, snow drifted softly under city lights. The storm had passed. The CEO looked at the twins again, then at their mother. "Human resources will assist you in the morning," she said. "Not charity. Opportunity." Marisol's eyes shimmered. "Thank you." He watched the exchange silently. Transformation wasn't loud. It was choice. The receptionist approached cautiously. "Coffee's still warm if anyone needs it." A few tired laughs surfaced. He glanced at the clock again. Just past midnight now. Christmas Day. His phone vibrated softly in his pocket. A message. Home safe. Waiting up. He didn't need to open it to know who it was from. The CEO noticed the shift in his expression. "You should go," she said quietly. "Monitoring? We'll manage the remaining observation." He hesitated. She met his gaze directly. "I trust you. Now trust us." The words carried weight. He nodded once. As he stepped away from the center of the lobby, employees parted slightly, not out of obligation but respect. The twins waved sleepily. "Bye, Captain," one whispered. He gave them a small nod in return. The doors opened, revealing a calmer night beyond. Behind him, the empire he had stabilized stood glowing against the snow, and for the first time since alarms began, power felt different inside those walls. Not louder. Wiser. He paused just inside the revolving doors as cold air brushed his face, the snow outside falling in slow, quiet spirals now. Behind him, the lobby glowed gold against the winter night, steady and unshaken. "Wait." Her voice carried across the marble floor, not sharp, not commanding. He turned. The CEO crossed the lobby toward him, heels softer than before against polished stone. The remaining staff pretended not to watch, though they did. "You'll still report in the morning," she said, stopping a few feet away. "Yes, ma'am. But before that, I need clarity." He held the door partially open, winter air slipping between them. "You said you escalated the vulnerabilities twice," she continued. "Names?" He studied her face for a moment, measuring intent. "Operations Director Keller," he said. "And Facilities Oversight." Her jaw tightened slightly. Those departments reported through layers before reaching her desk. "Documentation?" "In the maintenance log archive. Time-stamped." She nodded once. "I'll review it personally. I assumed you would." There was no arrogance in the statement, just expectation. Snow swirled in through the doorway, melting faintly against the marble. "You're aware," she said carefully, "that tonight exposed more than a mechanical failure." "Yes." It exposed structural blindness. He didn't soften it. "Yes, ma'am," she absorbed that. Behind her, Marisol was settling the twins onto a pair of executive lounge chairs that had been moved near the Christmas tree. The receptionist draped additional blankets over them. The board member approached hesitantly. "We've arranged a car service for the family in the morning." The CEO nodded. "And employment paperwork." Marisol looked startled again. "Ma'am, You asked for warmth," she said gently. "You'll leave with stability." The twins stirred sleepily, unaware that their mother's world had shifted alongside the buildings. He watched, quietly. "You intervened," she said, returning her focus to him. "Even after I ordered you to escort them out. I adjusted the lobby temperature," he admitted evenly. A faint breath of something almost like a laugh escaped her. "You defied me. I protected them. The difference hung between them." "And you'd do it again," she said. Yes, there was no hesitation. She studied him in silence, snowlight reflecting in her eyes. For years, she said slowly, I've built this company on efficiency, optimization, control. Yes, ma'am. Tonight I learned something uncomfortable. He waited. Control without listening becomes fragility. The words sounded new in her mouth. He nodded once. Systems fail quietly before they fail loudly. And people? The same way, silence stretched again, but not awkwardly. Honest. The board member shifted uneasily nearby, sensing a conversation larger than corporate restructuring unfolding before him. You could have let it collapse, she said softly. He frowned slightly. Why would I? You were dismissed, undervalued, ignored. That doesn't make the building expendable, or the people inside it. Understanding settled deeper across her features. You chose service, she said. Yes. And you never mentioned your rank, your experience. My uniform doesn't require it. She looked at the security jacket. Creased, practical, unremarkable, and saw it differently now. Tomorrow, she said, you'll sit at the head of that infrastructure review. I'll sit where I'm useful. She shook her head slightly. You still don't see it. See what? You weren't just useful tonight. He didn't respond. Because usefulness was never why he acted. Across the lobby, the receptionist approached cautiously. Ma'am, the final monitoring cycle is stable. We can reduce to passive observation. She nodded. Good. Snow softened further outside. The storm had fully passed. He stepped slightly back toward the door again. You should go home, she said. My son's waiting. I figured. She hesitated. I won't pretend tonight didn't reveal oversight failures, she continued. They'll be addressed. I believe you. You sound certain. I am. Something about that trust given freely, not negotiated, felt heavier than applause. The board member cleared his throat again. We'll need formal board approval for the new division. You'll have it, she said without looking away from him. He finally stepped through the revolving door, boots pressing into fresh snow outside. Cold air wrapped around him fully now, sharp and clean. She watched from inside as he paused on the sidewalk, glancing back once at the glowing tower. The building stood firm, not because of her authority, not because of board approval, because someone in worn boots had listened when it mattered. Inside, the Christmas tree lights shimmered against glass, and for the first time in years, she understood the difference between power and leadership. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he walked across the quiet street, breath rising in soft clouds beneath the city lights. Behind him, Vane Global's glass tower shimmered against the white night, restored, steady, humbled. He didn't look back again. Inside the building, the CEO remained near the towering Christmas tree long after the board member retreated, and the receptionist dimmed the lobby lights. The twins were asleep, curled together under borrowed blankets. Marisol sat beside them, hands wrapped around a warm cup, still absorbing the turn her life had taken in a single evening. Thank you, she said softly when the CEO approached. For what? She asked. For seeing us. The words lingered. She nodded once. Thoughtful, someone reminded me to. Across town, he unlocked the door to a modest townhouse tucked between identical brick fronts dusted with snow. Warm light spilled from the hallway. You're late, a small voice called sleepily from the couch. I know, he replied gently. Owen sat upright beneath a blanket, eyes wide with relief rather than complaint. Was it bad? It was, busy. He hung his jacket carefully and crouched beside his son. The faint scent of metal and cold clung to him. Did you fix it? Owen asked. Yes, his son grinned, pride unfiltered. I knew you would. He smiled faintly, brushing a hand through the boy's hair. "You should have been asleep." "I tried," Owen said with a shrug. "But I wanted to make sure you were okay." He understood that instinct. "I'm okay," he said quietly. "Everything's okay." Owen leaned forward, wrapping his arms around him in a tight hug. For a moment, the noise of generators and executive floors and shifting hierarchy faded completely. This was why he'd left prestige behind. Not because he couldn't lead. Because he already was. Back at the tower, dawn began pressing pale light against the glass. The storm had washed the city clean. Snow glittered along rooftops, untouched and bright. The CEO stood in her corner office hours later, reviewing archived maintenance logs with new clarity. Timestamps, escalation memos, risk assessments flagged and deferred. He hadn't exaggerated. He had warned them. She closed the file slowly. "Schedule the full infrastructure audit," she instructed her assistant. "And prepare a formal offer letter." "Yes, ma'am." "Also," she added, glancing toward the lobby where Marisol and the twins were now speaking with human resources, "create a community employment initiative." Effective immediately, her assistant blinked in surprise. Understood. She turned back toward the city skyline. Last night had revealed something numbers never could. Power wasn't proven in corner offices. It was proven in service corridors. Mid-morning sunlight filled the modest townhouse kitchen as he poured 2 cups of coffee, one strong, one light. Owen sat at the table drawing a picture of a tall building with bright lights. "That's where you work," the boy explained proudly. "I made it strong." He looked at the drawing. "You did," he said softly. His phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. Formal meeting request. 9 a.m. executive infrastructure review. He exhaled once, thoughtful. "Do you have to go back?" Owen asked. "Yes." "Are they going to listen now?" He smiled slightly. "Yes." Owen nodded, satisfied, and returned to his drawing. He finished his coffee and reached for his jacket again. Not as a security guard this time, not as a forgotten employee, but as someone stepping into a room where truth had already been proven. Across the city, Vane Global stood bright against clear skies. Employees arrived carrying fresh stories of what had happened overnight. Whispers spread, not about scandal, but about respect. The twins left that morning with their mother, paperwork in hand and relief in their steps. Opportunity instead of dismissal. Inside the boardroom, seats were rearranged slightly. Not symbolically, intentionally. When he entered, no one looked past him. They looked at him. The CEO stood at the head of the table, but when she gestured toward the empty seat beside her, it wasn't an order. It was an acknowledgement. And that is how Christmas morning began, not with headlines or heroics, but with a quiet correction of imbalance. Not just in a power grid, in perspective. If this story moved you, ask me for the next story title and I'll bring it to life. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. "Pretend to be my husband for a year," my boss said. The single dad asked so. "We're sharing a bed?" Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?